All right, in this politics video, let's talk about President Trump's suggestion to postpone the 2020 election. Let's take a look at the tweet. Early morning, July 30th, with universal mail-in voting, not absentee voting, which is good, 2020 will be the most inaccurate and fraudulent election in history. It will be a great embarrassment to the USA. Delay the election until people can properly, securely, and safely vote. He's discussing mail-in and absentee ballots. So he says mail-in ballots are a problem, but he's saying absentee are okay. So the key difference between the two, absentee is something that the military, for example, would do when they need to vote while they are away from their home. So a ballot is sent to them, they fill it out, and they mail it back. Mail-in voting, which is possible in many locations, is a ballot that you get in the mail in advance in the same way you'd receive an absentee ballot, and then you send it back, or you drop it off on election day. So he's suggesting that there's fraud in the ballots. And let me say, in voting, there certainly have been stories in the past about glitches, especially at polling stations in particular. But regardless, when you have glitches or any problems, you should be fixing the issues and hardening security, okay? And for the record, mail-in voting fraud is extremely low and not a problem whatsoever at any scale. And I would encourage you to take a closer look at those numbers. So basically, for the issues that do exist, which are small, we need to tackle them and improve our elections, harden security, and smooth out the glitches. But it is not in any large fashion or large scale. It's not a big problem. So suggesting over this to delay the election is pretty extreme. And there's a COVID-19 hypocrisy to all of this as well. Let's discuss that for a moment. Because he's suggesting that since he says mail-in is fraudulent, that we cannot vote in person because it's not safe. At the same time, we're pushing to reopen schools and pushing for the economy to reopen. So clearly, it's safe to do everything except vote in the current administration's sort of mentality, which is hypocritical. It doesn't make any sense at all. On a side note, though not terribly relevant to this, Barron Trump will not be attending the private school because it is restricted from having in-person classes. So the president's son will not be returning to school, but many schools are reopening in full, and some may not be properly prepared for the pandemic. So those kids would face the uncertainty of whether they go back to a safe school or not a safe school, which is not great. Getting back to the tweet, there has been bipartisan backlash to Trump's suggestion to delay the 2020 election. And for the record, it is not actually possible without amending the Constitution, and definitely Congress would need to be completely on board. In other words, there's nothing that could postpone an election. It's never been postponed before. We do an election when there's war or anything going on. Among the people speaking out about this and outraged are right-wingers as well, some of which have suggested that this is actually a re-impeachable offense on top of the other impeachment that we had, which the president was found not guilty of in the trial. There's an additional hypocrisy about suggesting to delay the election because recently the president was, through his press secretary, also condemning Hong Kong's delayed election. And it was the next day, I believe, basically right after, where Trump said, let's delay our election. We can't do it. It might be unsafe. And there are mail-in voting issues. And also, Hong Kong can't delay their election, right? So not digging into any of the issues of Hong Kong, but basically, it's just hypocritical to say, let's delay ours. They can't delay theirs without digging into the issues. There is no, that would be a hypocritical statement. And Shortly afterwards of this, he has walked back his suggestion to delay the election after all the outrage. And he tried to spin it and say he actually wants the election to happen sooner, happen today if possible. So it's just like trying to cover everything up and make it sound better or try to walk it back because of the outrage. And in general, this is all messy communication, and perhaps it's actually intentional to distract from what is going on, especially the plunge in the GDP recently, which experienced a larger contraction than even the contraction that defined the Great Depression. So, on a final point, suggesting that we should delay the election, it's certainly highly controversial. Many people disagreed. In fact, the vast majority, I did not really see any voices in favor of postponing the election. And postponing it would definitely be against the idea of democracy. And depending who you ask, postponing or suggesting to postpone an election might actually be anti-American altogether.